Hello, and thank you for attending our presentation. My name is David Thomas, and I'm the Director of Tax and Estate Planning on the life insurance side of our business at Empire Life. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about repositioning corporate assets, which is essentially a presentation focused on the new passive corporate income tax rules. This presentation was born out of a meeting with advisors, basically a request for information on this topic, with the recognition at that discussion that an advisor's job seems to be getting more difficult all the time, with changing products, increased number of products, more regulation, additional tax changes, and an increased expectation that the advisor will have a degree of expertise in all of these areas. It may once have been acceptable and sufficient for an advisor to review risks in a client's life, make recommendations to meet those insurance needs, and put together a reasonably diversified investment portfolio of funds on a risk-appropriate basis to build towards a client's retirement. Now I hear advisors say, if I can't advise my client what to do with their investments to address these new tax changes, I'm not properly serving them. So that's the new reality that we're working in. Higher expectations, increased needs to integrate services with the client's other professionals. These are serious demands to address serious issues. The main issue that this presentation will be talking about are the passive income tax rules for private corporations that were introduced last year, 2018. And make no mistake about it, those rules created serious problems for those of your clients caught in the government's crosshairs. Anytime we start talking about tax rates exceeding 100%, that's a pretty serious problem. So here's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. I'm going to review the passive income tax rules themselves and talk about some repositioning alternatives. First one I'm going to talk about is a corporate asset strip, or sometimes called surplus strip. Cash value life insurance is an alternative that we'll obviously talk about. And individual pension plans are another approach that can help with these issues. And there's some other, which is a catch-all, we'll talk a little bit about a couple of other ideas that may be helpful. So the first thing I want to do is to review the passive income rules themselves. The passive income rules came into being because in the finance department, there was an objection to the ability of business owners to use private corporations as tax deferral vehicles. Tax deferral results from a lower initial small business tax rate, about 12 to 13% in most provinces, compared to top individual tax rates of often over 50%. And finance objected to private corporations using these greater after-tax business earnings to invest in passive assets. They were fine with the investment back into the productive active business assets of corporations, but they didn't like passive income or passive assets. So new rules were introduced as part of a tax fairness package. And this despite existing rules that integrated private company and personal taxes, such that approximately the same amount of after-tax funds were available to spend once funds were removed from the corporation, and the legitimate reasons for private companies to accumulate passive assets, including providing reserve funding for seasonal or cyclical businesses or future business expansions, encouraging entrepreneurship and rewarding business owners who risk their capital, and to provide a way for business owners to accumulate assets for their retirement. These objections from finance led to a series of proposals, the earlier one being completely unworkable and ill-fated, and the existing rules which were implemented last year to become effective this year. I hesitate to say the final versions, since objections to and discussions about these new rules continue. So here are the current rules that we have summarized in this slide. I liken the passive income tax rules to the OAS clawback mechanism, because most of us are familiar with how the old age security clawback works. You earn income over a certain threshold and they claw back a benefit. In the case of OAS, the benefit they claw back is the old age security payment itself. In these rules, what they are measuring is the amount of passive income generated by a business. The threshold amount is $50,000 of passive income, and the benefit that they are taking away is access to the small business tax rate for the active business income of the corporation. So the clawback works that $5 for every dollar of passive income over the threshold amount of $50,000 up to a maximum of $150,000 claws back the whole $500,000 of small business limit. Access to the small business limit will be eliminated at roughly $3 million of passive assets based on the government's assumed 5% rate of return in their discussion papers. They have combined amounts for associated companies, so there's no value in planning to have your active business income in an operating company and your passive income in a holding company. The proposals also included some limitations on refundable dividend tax on hand, eliminating that refund for anything but non-eligible dividends. It's not as serious a consequence and not something I'm going to be elaborating on in this presentation, but you should know that it came out in the same legislation. And no dividends from income tax that preferred rates will generate that refund. And when did this party start? Well, it's already started. It's effective for taxation years after 2018, so obviously starting this year, 2019, but not necessarily everybody has seen the impact. If your business owner has an early year end, January through almost up to the end of June, they have to file their tax return 6 months after that year end. So a January year-end corporation would file its tax return by July, and those business owners have already seen the impact of these rules. However, there's an awful lot of December 31st year ends, so there's a number of your clients who have December 31st year ends who may not have seen the impact of these new rules yet and will not see them until as late as June of next year when their tax returns are done. So let's review a case study on Joe's garage to see the impact of these new rules. Joe runs a very successful garage business, in large part due to expanding into trucking when he was younger, and his garage is now largely providing maintenance on his fleet of trucks. As Joe has aged, he's now age 65, he's cut back on growing his business and is accumulating passive assets in his holding company, now up to $3 million. Joe's income is a very healthy $500,000 from his active businesses, plus another $150,000 from his passive assets in his holding company. And Joe, of course, is wondering about the impact of these new passive income rules. So, what I've done here is put together a slide comparing what Joe's situation would be if he only had $50,000 of passive income in his holding company, that's the column on the left, comparing to his current situation of $150,000 of passive income, the column on the right. So if I go through the left-hand column for you, Joe has $500,000 of active business income. At a $50,000 level of passive income, he has no clawback or reduction of his small business limit. So he has $500,000 of income taxed at, this is the average rate across the country of 12% on as the small business tax rate. So he pays $60,000 of tax on his active business income. And he has nothing taxed at the higher general active business rate of 27%. Plus, he also has to pay tax on his passive income. He has passive income of $50,000. Again, the average rate across the country for tax on passive income is 50.7%. So there's another $25,000 and change. So his total tax bill on his income is $85,335. And if we add in an additional $100,000 of passive income, so that Joe's passive income is now up to $150,000, we start with his active business, still $500,000. However, he doesn't pay tax at the small business rate on any of that. His small business limit is entirely clawed back, so he has nothing taxed at the small business rate of 12%, and he has all his active business taxed at the higher general corporate tax rate of 27%. So that's $135,000 on his active business income. And to this, of course, we have to add the tax on his passive income, now $150,000 at that same tax rate, 50.7%, so $76,000 and change, for a total tax bill of $210,750. So this extra $100,000 of passive income has resulted in an increase in taxes for Joe of $125,670. That's over 125% tax rate. So how are the government's tax fairness provisions? You tell me. How does an effective tax rate in excess of 100% strike you? What I've done is just compared Joe as kind of the worst case scenario, but these are the rules in most provinces across the country. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about a couple of exceptions. But if you were advising Joe on investments, you would likely think that getting an average tax rate, an average rate of return of 5% is doing a pretty good job. But this year, that will result in after-tax loss of that last $100,000 of passive income of about $25,500. Want to improve the after-tax rate of return? How about a current account at the bank that pays zero, or the old joke of just stuffing the cash in the mattress? If he's in that clawback income range, the more you make him, the more he loses. A business owner in Joe's position, fully impacted by these new rules, is literally better off without the passive income over the government's $50,000 threshold. So since this is clearly an unacceptable solution or unacceptable situation, other than continued lobbying of the government to amend these rules to something that comes closer to tax fairness, what can we advise Joe to do? Now, as I mentioned, this is the situation in most provinces across Canada. This is the average tax rates in 8 of the 10 provinces. I have put up a very similar slide here, which is the case for Ontario, because Ontario and New Brunswick are 2 provinces that have provincially opted out of following the Fed's lead on these passive income tax rules. They have decided not to claw back the small business limit for the provincial portion of taxes. So we have a much less serious situation, still pretty serious. It's exactly the same calculation that I go through in the left and the right-hand columns of $50,000 and $150,000 of passive income. But you will see that the active business rate, or the general rate, is no longer the full 27%, but it is a much lower rate. So the active business tax rate in the middle of that slide, 18.5%, is the normal or regular tax rate federally, and the small business tax rate provincially. So we've ended up with $80,000 in passive or of total additional taxes on the $100,000 of additional income. So an 80% effective rate. Well, still very serious taxation rate. I don't pretend that it is a good outcome. It's a lot better than 125%. And the results do vary somewhat across the province. As I mentioned, I believe New Brunswick is the other province that has opted out, so it looks more like Ontario, and the other provinces look, roughly like the national average. So what we're going to talk to Joe about is repositioning his corporate assets. when I go to attend technical sessions on these new tax rules, the lawyers and accountants who are talking about them will generally propose a corporate asset strip or surplus strip as the preferred method of dealing with the passive income tax rules. If you don't like the impact of these new rules, just get the money out of the corporation. And by the way, don't pay full tax rates to do it. And what they recommend is looking at a corporate asset strip. There are two main rationales behind this recommendation. First is it's better to get the cash out of the company with a one-time hit of maybe 25%, again, kind of an average rate, than paying ongoing onerous taxes on any income generated inside the corporation. And there is likely a limited time frame where this type of planning will be available. Since when the government withdrew their anti-surplus stripping rules, they stated they were not proceeding at this time. These anti-surplus stripping rules were introduced 2 years ago in 2017, along with the passive income tax rules and the tax on split income rules. And they proceeded with two of them, tax on split income and the small business passive income tax rules, but they did not proceed with the anti-surplus stripping rules. So my interpretation of not proceeding at this time was that it was too late in the government's mandate to force another extremely unpopular tax change on the small business sector. It's better to wait until after the next federal election, which of course has already happened. Now it was October of this year, and count on the short-term memory from the voting public to proceed with the next round of changes. Now, I'm not a very good political pundit, so I can't really tell you what, if any, impact the federal election resulting in a minority government might have on the willingness to proceed with these new rules. But one of the things that I mentioned a couple of slides ago is these rules were driven by the finance department. And that's one of the things I try and determine whenever I'm looking at a new set of tax rules. Who's driving the bus? By that I mean, is it the government of the day's wish to implement these rules, or is it the finance department? And in this case, it's clearly the finance department. So I doubt that they've been sitting idle in the last 2 years. They had a completely unworkable set of proposals in 2017. You probably remember the headlines. What is the state of succession planning in this country? It costs more to sell my business to my kids than it does to a complete stranger. Made for very unpopular tax policy, and it was very short-lived. They withdrew it about 3 months after the legislation was introduced. So there is a possibility that they will start looking at anti-surplus stripping rules again. I don't know if that's going to be one of the first things the government does. I don't know whether the minority government situation will have an impact on that, but I think it's good to realize that there is at least some possibility that there will be another round of anti-surplus stripping rules. So there is some question about getting these transactions done. But the actual process of a corporate asset strip, I'm not going to go through in any particular detail. The basic idea here was to take corporate assets which are normally distributed as fully taxable payments to the shareholder. By fully taxable, I mean salary or bonus, which attracts tax at the highest rate individually, or by non-eligible dividends, which is typically the other answer, a little less expensive, maybe 45% on average instead of 50+% for salary, but fully taxable income. And rather than do that, go through a process, pipeline planning referred to on the slide here has been one of the popular ways to do that, and extract that money as capital gains. So that was the general idea behind these. It was perfectly legitimate tax planning when it started. It was temporarily suggested that they were not going to allow that kind of transaction. The slide mentions the July 18th proposals and the withdrawal on October the 19th. So, but with the withdrawal of those proposals, This is perfectly legitimate tax planning again. It was designed originally in an estate situation to avoid double taxation that results from assets inside holding companies. The process just quickly or in general was for the estate to set up the new company. This also was done as lifetime or inter vivos planning now, so it could just be the current shareholder. Shares from the existing company are transferred to the new company. The estate in this situation receives the note for the value of the transferred shares plus share capital in the new company. No capital gain is realized on this transaction. That's done on a deferral basis, but the cost basis of the shares is increased by the capital gain realized on death. And any increase in that share value since death can be deferred under Section 85 election under the Tax Act. And the estate ends up owning the new company shares, which in turn own the existing company's shares. If that structure was maintained for a year and the existing company continued to operate, not just hold cash, then the two companies could be amalgamated after that period. And then they wind up, liquidate the assets of the company, use that cash to repay the note to the estate back tax-free. The result is we don't have dividend tax, only the lower original capital gains tax. So that's how we get the 25% tax rate. And if you're at the top tax bracket and you were considering dividends as your alternative, there's roughly 20% tax advantage in doing this. If you didn't follow the waiting period, they would disallow the strategy. So here we have a situation where we've got perfectly good planning, but it takes perhaps a year, maybe longer, sometimes as much as 18 months to implement. And we have questions about whether this anti-surplus stripping legislation might come back again. So I think part of the discussion about this particular strategy is whether you're willing to take some tax risk about being able to complete one of these transactions. As I mentioned, it's perfectly legitimate tax planning. There's lots of CRA correspondence on this strategy, both previous to the government's 2017 proposals and after the withdrawal of those proposals. The government's also provided opinions that GAR, the General Anti-Avoidance Tax Rules, would not apply. One caveat that was particularly pertinent to the estate situation is liquidation of the corporate assets during that holding or waiting period between the two steps in the transactions would result in simply investment portfolio assets being in the company, and that was not considered an active business and would derail this transaction. So that would be problematic for business owners who had sold off the corporate assets. I have lots of references to documents that CRA had provided in terms of opinions that this is legitimate tax planning. But the fly in the ointment here could be that the strategy does require the business to be continued for a year after the first reorganization to be successful or effective. And do we have that year left before the rules might change again? And what might they do with any transactions that are in midstream? And if we take any guidance from the 2017 tax proposals, they did not make any provision for transactions that were midstream. They killed anything that wasn't completed by the date of the introduction of the legislation. So if you hadn't finished your tax planning reorganization, well, you were done anyway. So the other thing that I should talk about on the corporate asset strip before I move on to the next one is when this planning is most appropriate. And listening to the various speakers that talk about the surplus strips, it's most appropriate for monies that the client was planning to take out of the company anyway. Certainly, if you were living off that money and it was remuneration that was required by the business owner and his family for day-to-day living, it made very good sense to do this. But what if it was money that was not going to be withdrawn from the company in the short or even intermediate time frame. Did you want to implement one of these strategies and effectively prepay tax, albeit at a favorable rate, 25% rate instead of a 45 or 50% tax rate, but it is still prepayment of taxes earlier than you might otherwise have to. And prepayment of taxes has never been a popular strategy either. So there is questions about when this is the most appropriate time to do a corporate asset strip. So if one of the methods of dealing with the passive asset and passive income tax rules is for private corporations to remove those assets from the corporation, then another would be to remove those passive assets from a taxable environment. And as we all know, one such way of sheltering passive assets from taxation is to reposition those assets into cash value life insurance product. We have been advising clients for years on the value of life insurance solutions to a number of estate and business planning needs, including estate shrinkage and estate equalizations, creditor protections, key person protection or incentive packages, buy-sell agreement funding, which could be a presentation all on its own, and simply debt retirement. And in any insurance proposal, we still need to start our planning with the need for life insurance that is being addressed. So my message here is the same as the old investment adage of don't let the tax tail wag the investment dog, only in this case, it's the insurance dog. You still need to have a reason for implementing an insurance solution. I don't think it's the appropriate planning to say, oh, you have a passive income tax problem, the solution is to buy life insurance. I think you start your planning with your clients with the need for life insurance. I think you'd be hard pressed to find very many clients who couldn't benefit or realize one or have one of these needs for life insurance. I've presented this talk to accounting and law offices as well, and I've gotten no pushback from those as this solution probably being the widest appealing solution to the most clients that could potentially implement a life insurance solution. And we are all generally familiar with the advantages of using corporately owned life insurance. Probably the primary one is that provision of an immediate and higher estate value than other investments. But the one that we may be most focused on in terms of today's discussion is the sheltering of the growth inside the insurance policy from taxation on the funds invested. Clearly, it provides a tax-free payout on death to the corporate owner. In fact, it doesn't matter who the owner is. The death benefit is always tax-free. But in the context of a corporate owner, we also talk about taking advantage of the capital dividend account for reduced taxation to the estate. So those are the advantages that we already know and love. But now it seems that we can add another advantage to that list. And it can help alleviate the increased active business taxation from the small business limit clawback resulting from these new passive income tax rules. So if I go back to our case study, in your discussion with Joe, one of the key questions you've helped Joe with is whether his business may require the passive assets to reinvest, whether Joe might require these assets, or at least income from them, to support his retirement lifestyle needs, or whether these assets are truly expected to be surplus to his and his business's requirements. In this case, we've concluded that these assets are, in all likelihood, not needed for business or personal reasons. So you and Joe decide to keep $1 million of the passive assets in their current liquid form, just in case, because the first $50,000 of passive income does not cause a clawback of Joe's small business limit anyway. And to meet Joe's needs, you recommend our corporate legacy builder strategy. You want to reposition these assets as quickly as possible. So Empire's 8-pay Estate Max whole life product with the enhanced dividend option is the product of choice. Now, of course, in your discussions with your clients, you will determine the best product and options like dividend options. But in this case, It was my discussions with Joe, so that was the solution that I'm proposing in this particular case. So I'm going to look at the impact of a corporate legacy builder solution and the impact on the passive income tax rules. The corporate legacy builder is a strategy that enables business owners to grow passive assets and/or surplus profits on a tax-deferred basis. This alternative to a company's taxable investments is designed to provide a business with higher tax-free value of the business for the estate or surviving shareholders. It permits a business to benefit from a tax-deferred program with no increase in risk, while still permitting access to cash for business needs. For this solution, I've illustrated an Estate Max life insurance policy using the enhanced coverage option. Estate Max was used since it creates the largest estate values, and the enhanced dividend option was used to create higher minimum estate value in the case of early death. The $2 million of available capital was allocated as 8 payments of $250,000 premium payments, which purchased about $2.8 million of initial coverage. This illustration is created on our Envision illustration system and passed over to AdCalc to create the corporate legacy builder illustration that you are looking at here. This is a screenshot out of the AdCalc software for the corporate legacy builder strategy. When the illustration prepared in Envision is passed over to AdCalc, additional assumptions are required, and they are the alternative investment, which is a portfolio, and I've assumed a 5% rate of return, which is consistent with both Joe's existing portfolio and expectations, and the government's assumed rate of return on passive assets in their examples about the passive income tax rules. The corporate investment tax rate here was 50.5%, and the personal non-eligible dividend tax rate was 45%. Again, these tax rates are not specific to any particular province, but just a representative average of rates across the country. And this screenshot from the AdCalc software is of the executive summary, which shows the results of the corporate legacy strategy at 10-year intervals. There's also a detailed page that has every year up to the client's age 100. The key driver for this concept is the increase in the after-tax payout that can be achieved from the corporation to the estate. In this example, the results indicate a dramatic improvement in estate values for the insurance solution over the alternative investment. In this case, with a 65-year-old client, I have focused on the 20-year results, assuming Joe is to pass away at his age 85. At this point, there's an over $1.1 million increase in the after-tax benefit to the estate by using the corporate legacy builder strategy, or over a 50% increase. This concept illustration also provides a pre-tax equivalent rate of return calculation for each potential year of death, indicating the rate of return that would be required to be earned inside the corporation to match the benefits of the corporate legacy builder solution. At year 20, this is still over 9%. And this quick pay approach using our 8-pay solution has been a very popular approach to the corporate legacy builder strategy before 2017, when life insurance tax changes came about, and has continued to be very popular with how well it works with our 8-pay products, in this case, our Estate Max product, but it works well with our Optimax Wealth product as well, which I have not shown today. But that's useful where higher early cash values are a priority for the client. So now with the passive income tax changes, it should remain popular with those clients who have passive income or passive assets in their corporation. So you'll notice in that discussion of the corporate legacy builder, I wasn't talking about the impact on the passive income tax rules at all. It's been a very successful strategy on its own with clients that had never heard about passive income tax problems or potentially don't have passive income tax problems. As I said, the corporate legacy builder concept's been very popular and successful strategy at Empire, first with our Trilogy and Trilogy Plus universal life policies that we started with before the 2017 exempt tax changes, and now with our Estate Max and Optimax wealth policies, particularly in their 8-pay versions. And this success was a function of the enhancements that could be achieved for the client's estate alone. Now, for clients impacted by the new passive income tax rules, like Joe, they have an additional incentive in the tax savings that can be achieved by repositioning their corporate assets into a life insurance policy. So this slide summarizes both the estate enhancement, that is the corporate legacy builder solution on its own, plus the tax savings that Joe can achieve with the corporate legacy builder solution with regards to the passive income tax problem. Like all insurance solutions, the early benefits to the estate are the most dramatic before all the premiums have been paid, and the benefit compared to an investment portfolio tapers down as all the premiums go into the policy, but then increase again as the values within the policy grow. The figures shown for the estate enhancement already include the savings achieved by reducing the amount of funds in taxable investments, and therefore the passive income tax rates. What it does not include is the additional tax savings achieved from reducing the clawback of Joe's small business limit and reducing his active business income tax. This amount is smaller initially, but grows quickly with the full amount of funds moved into the policy over the 8-year guaranteed premium payment period. By year 8, Joe has fully restored his small business limit, saving him $75,000 a year. And if we look out to that same 20-year point where we looked at the $1.1 million of estate enhancement, we can add another $1.2 million of additional tax savings by avoiding the passive income tax problems. So just to review, I put in year 1, year 8, and year 20. Year 1 will show the dramatic estate enhancement of just paying one policy premium and getting the full death benefit, plus only $9,375 of the additional passive income tax problem. We've only at that point moved $250,000 out of the $2 million of Joe's money. And by year 8, we've got it fully funded. We're up to that $75,000 of tax savings, which is the additional incremental tax on the active business that Joe has to pay. And then the last column I used was the 20-year projection of something that might be close to Joe's life expectancy. So as you can see, the numbers are significant if we are forecasting a few things to remain as they are today. And those are probably fairly significant assumptions. The first assumption is that the passive income tax rules are going to stick around. That seems to be more likely now than it was perhaps before the October election. And the other thing that has to remain the same is that Joe's garage is being managed in the same fashion it is today. Ongoing $500,000 of active business income and ongoing passive income of $150,000 or more, so that Joe would be fully impacted by these rules. So that's a fairly big if, and at Joe's age 85 in 20 years' time, I'm not sure that he's going to be running his business in the same fashion. So perhaps that assumes a Joe Jr. is on the scene or a family member that's going to be running this business in the same fashion. It's important to remember that if Joe were to sell his active business, he no longer has a passive income tax problem. If all he is earning is passive income and they want to claw back his small business limit for his active business income, he really doesn't care. He has no active business. So I guess I could have included in the list of solutions is to sell the active business. Well, that's probably not great planning for most clients, but if they are coming up to retirement and considering what their succession plans for their business are. It's important to remember that these rules impact people that have the combination of both high active business income and high passive income in their corporations. And again, I have a summary slide here. The first one was kind of at the average provincial rates for 8 of the 10 provinces. And this slide, I picked Ontario. I have the New Brunswick calculations done as well, but they're quite similar. And all it is a much smaller impact on the cumulative savings for the passive income taxes that can be avoided. So instead of over $1.2 million in Ontario, that is roughly $500,000, $495,000 on this slide. But still a significant problem or potential tax savings for those that are impacted by these rules. So there are a number of ways to reposition corporate assets in order to minimize taxes. We've looked at moving funds back into personal hands where passive income investments are not penalized the way they are in private corporations. We've also looked at using life insurance for clients with a life insurance need. Now let's turn to another tax shelter vehicle that was once fairly popular. We have already started to hear from practitioners who specialize in this area that the new passive income tax rules have started to rekindle the demand for individual pension plans. So what is an IPP or individual pension plan? Well, the first thing it is a misnomer. It's a one-person pension plan. It's a defined benefit pension plan. And yes, it can be for one person, but it can also have more than one person. So it needs a minimum of one person to create the pension plan, but then it's hard to do very much for less than one person. It's an employer-sponsored plan. All the contributions need to be actuarially determined. Its main reason for existence is it can generate greater retirement contributions than our RSPs, particularly for the target clients that we're going to look at in a page or so. And that requires the administration, and the company also pays for the compliance. The benefits are like your typical, I would call it a government pension plan, 2% per year of service of your earnings, indexed to inflation, T4 based earnings. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And the indexation is based on consumer price index. The one thing that is different here when we talk about earnings is normally a government or an old style corporate employer pension plan is based on a final average earnings calculation. Individual pension plans started that way, but people played some tricks with the rules. And now they have decided the best way to do this is lifetime average of earnings. So good news and bad news. You can't play the game of jacking up your client's income in the last few years to create a high final average earnings. But it also means if you have been favoring dividend tax remuneration over T4 based earnings for a few years, it's only going to impact for those few years that you might have been favoring the dividend taxation. So why do we do IPPs? Well, mainly it's to increase the tax savings that we can do on a tax efficient basis. We reduce the taxable income in the business, largely through past service pension contributions, plus the current service as well. It's put in place sometimes to retain key employees, more likely for the business owners themselves. It can be used in preparation for sale of a business to help strip excess cash out of the company. It may form part of a living buyout plan. And now, of course, like the other situation, I can add that it will help address these new rules, on the passive income tax rules impacting Canadian-controlled private corporations. The main condition to be a candidate for an individual pension plan is to have employment income. So there must be a bona fide employment relationship. So compensation for pension purposes, taxable income that is reported on any variety of T4, T4A, T4 profit sharing, those sorts of things. That includes salaries, wages, bonuses, directors' fees, taxable benefits and allowances, and even distributions from employee profit sharing plans, if you happen to see one of those anymore. Self-employment earnings are not pension eligible, and dividend income, which is T5 reportable income, is not pension eligible. The target client or optimum client would be older, higher income clients. It's not necessary to have the absolute maximum income. You'll see there noted on the slide that in 2019, it's 151,000 and change that is the maximum income that is pensionable. But certainly, like most tax planning strategies, the higher the income, the better the savings opportunity are, higher to the limit of 151,278 there. So the main advantages are the higher contributions for people that fit that age and earnings profile. Also, significant past service contributions can be created for those that have a longer history with their company. For someone over age of 55 with past service going back to January 1st of 1991, when these rules for individual pension plans started, and had maximum earnings, they could expect to accumulate more than 50% additional savings using an individual pension plan versus a registered retirement savings plan by age 60, 65, or even up to age 71. The past service provided must satisfy past service pension adjustment requirements. And for past service, a connected person, that is somebody with greater than 10% shareholdings in the company, can only go back to that 1991 date. For a non-connected employee without 10% or greater shareholdings, they can go back to the date of hire. What are some of the other advantages of an individual pension plan? One of the main things the corporation benefits is the ability to make further tax-deductible contributions if the plan was underfunded. So we see here on the slide that what happens if the plan does not achieve the net investment rate forecast to be 7.5%. So why would you use 7.5% forecast in this environment where I would think that 7.5% would be a bit of a stretch for most advisors today? And the answer is simply that is the maximum permitted by the actuarial rules. And if we come up with a shortfall, the company is obligated to make up that shortfall. And the idea here was to put away greater retirement savings into a tax-sheltered plan. So hence the use of the maximum allowable 7.5% forecast rate. In addition to the contributions, all the expenses are tax deductible. Plan surpluses generally belong to the participants. And it's not subject to payroll taxes in a number of provinces, as noted on the slide. And these plans can use any of our investment products offerings, either alone or in combination. Now, the last advantage that I wanted to talk about with individual pension plans is this idea of a multi-generational plan. And in fact, even before the private corporation tax proposals came out, this may have been the niche where IPPs really made sense in the face of higher RRSP contribution limits and the administration fees that were eating into their advantages. So this structure is ideal for family businesses where the next generation is involved in the business. So here we have the picture of Dad, who is in this case the owner of our business. We haven't got the picture of the next generation unless that's them in the background, a little blurry. But if you have a child or children involved in the business, maybe dad looks like an ideal candidate over that age 50-55 threshold. Perhaps he's got the right kind of six-figure income to be a prime candidate. You wouldn't initially necessarily think of the children being prime candidates. They aren't at that kind of middle age, and they may not be making the six-figure income unless dad here is particularly benevolent. But we mentioned that, in the case of premature death, and I mean, we're all wishing dad a long, happy retirement so that he spends all his pension money. But if he doesn't live a long, healthy retirement, doesn't spend all that money, I already mentioned the plan surpluses remain in the plan and go to the current participants. So if the current participant, after dad passes away, is his child or children, what we have achieved here is a intergenerational transfer of a registered plan. So as I quip when I present this to groups, try that with your RRSP and let me know how it works out. You can't do it. So I think this has been a situation, a niche, if you will, for IPPs all the way along, even in the years of their waning popularity, although as noted earlier, they are making a bit of a resurgence now. So those were the main strategies that I wanted to talk about in terms of repositioning alternatives. The corporate asset strip, the cash value life insurance, and the individual pension plan. But what other alternatives are available to deal with passive income tax rules? Removing assets from the corporation may be appropriate, depending on your client's circumstances. Cash value life insurance could be, or an individual pension plan may or may not best serve your client's needs, or quite likely it could be a combination of strategies. What else is left? Perhaps just reducing the amount of taxable income the passive assets generate is an option, hopefully without having to resort to stuffing cash into a mattress. So I wanted to look at other alternative here, a few ways to reduce the impact of these tax changes, which require some repositioning of corporate assets as well. The first one there, the use of public company shares that pay minimal dividends in a low turnover portfolio. It's a classic way to manage investments in a taxable environment, no matter what kind of taxes we're talking about. Managing money in a taxable environment is not new to investment managers. So not everybody has access to public companies directly, but these can be achieved through funds as well, looking for growth-oriented opportunities as opposed to high dividend opportunities. The next two, the use of corporate class mutual funds or Series T mutual funds, is again a selection of investment products that minimizes taxable distributions. In this case, they're a bit more specialized products designed to offer tax advantages. I realize that some of the shine has gone off corporate class mutual funds, but they do still specialize or focus their distributions on less taxable investment income, return of capital in a lot of cases. I could also add to this category the use of some unit trust vehicles such as REITs, real estate investment trusts, that offer similar benefits if that type of investment is available to you. And the last alternative here is not so much repositioning corporate assets as it is repositioning the corporation itself. So let me talk a little bit about this one. And this one is a little controversial in my mind in terms of whether it can be successful in terms of helping with the tax. But here I have depicted two structures for a holding company, holdco, and an operating company, opco. The first is quite traditional structure with the shareholder here, Mr. X. I could have said Joe, owning shares in a holdco, which in turn owns the shares of opco. In this structure, holdco and opco are associated companies, and since the new rules consider associated companies in determining the clawback of the small business limit, passive investments within holdco impact the active business taxation of OpCo, which of course is what I've been talking about this whole presentation. In the second structure on the right, this requires that Mrs. X be a shareholder and own all of the shares of one or the other of the companies. Here, I used Holdco, and Mr. X owned the other here, OpCo. Since these are 100% ownership interests, Holdco and OpCo are not associated, and Holdco's passive investment income will not impact OpCo's active business taxation, in effect restoring OpCo's access to a small business limit. Well, this might look pretty simple on paper, simple enough that even I could draw it, and I'm not an expert in PowerPoint. It is certainly not easy to do. Achieving this structure is not without many complications and perhaps unintended tax consequences, and may or may not ever be successful in trying to accomplish with all the additional tax rules that the government has introduced to try and stop this kind of income splitting. That discussion is well beyond the scope of this presentation, but attribution rules and other new rules on tax on split income could enter into the picture here as well. This is likely as complex a reorganization as the surplus strip or pipeline strategy that I began with, so will definitely require the client's tax professionals before you start thinking about this kind of a restructuring. The other one that I don't have a slide on is that last bullet point, and I'll go back here to my last bullet point of corporate migration. As I've mentioned, these rules apply to Canadian-controlled private corporation. And here my thinking is on the emphasis of Canadian. What if we were to migrate the corporation outside of Canada, have it controlled in the US or somewhere else, for instance? And when I was presenting in one accounting office talking about this, one of the tax practitioners there said, in fact, they had started doing just that. They were going to migrate their client's corporation to a Delaware ULC, a fairly popular kind of US structure. They'd been working on it for some 6 months. They had not successfully got the ULC set up yet, much less their clients' assets and business operations transferred into it. So again, my point in mentioning this is it is complex tax reorganization work. It's probably fairly expensive. It could yield the results you're looking for. I'm not suggesting that we all go out and do this, but it's another alternative that you should be aware of and think about. Because my point in this presentation is largely that these are pretty serious tax changes, and you want to make your clients aware of a range of possibilities so they make informed decisions about what they can do about it. I think in a lot of cases, it's a combination of strategies that may be the best way to serve your clients, that no one strategy is going to be the silver bullet for passive income tax problems. So in summary, we've reviewed the corporate asset strip, cash value life insurance, the use of individual pension plans, and a few other ideas at the end. So I hope that was useful for you and your clients. And if you have any questions, I would encourage you to get in touch with the life insurance account executive in your area, and we can start some subsequent discussions. So thank you for listening, and have yourself a great day.